Next, we'll be hearing from Father Sirico, co-founder and president of the Acton Institute, a man known to all of us in this room. You also know he's a remarkable priest, entrepreneur, and public intellectual. His gifts include a brilliant synthetic mind, a compassionate pastoral heart, and a huge dose of courage, both personal and intellectual. Courage, especially as it manifests itself in the willingness to speak truth to power, will be increasingly crucial for all of us in the years ahead. This video segment by way of the final introduction of Father, I want to show a very short clip of Father speaking truth to power. Just one instance of Father's courage. In-house, we call this boxing with boxer. Roll the tape.
Father, this was kind of interesting. The Acton Institute's strong support for Catholicism and free market economics has come under strain as Pope Francis has actively criticized global inequality and unfettered capitalism. In May 2014, the Pope's Twitter account posted a tweet, the Pope's, saying, quote, "Inequality is the root of all evil," unquote. Joe Carter, a senior editor at Acton, tweeted in reply, this is to the Pope saying inequality is the root of all evil. Seriously, though, what was up with that tweet by the pontiff? Has he traded the writings of Peter and Paul for economist Piketty? I mean, so do you disagree with the Pope when he says that climate change is one of the biggest issues and we have to
Senator, I'm very grateful for your defense of the Pope. Perhaps not in all of his magisterial authority and the cherry picking of this or that.
I can ask you what I want. Do you disagree with the Pope on climate change? It's a simple yes or no.
When the Pope says things that have to do with science, he does not speak from the magisterial authority of the Church. When he speaks on moral issues, such as abortion and contraception and the like, then he speaks.
So who's cherry picking? You're saying that when the planet is facing all these problems, it's not a moral issue. I
never said that. Where did I say that? Could you give me that quotation, Senator?
You just said it, sir.
I did not.
Sir, you received money from the Koch brothers, from Exxon. You disagree with the Pope.
I never said I didn't.
You tend to wear the cloth here in front of us. I think you ought to have a talk with Reverend Nelson.
If you like that snippet, we have a 7-minute version you'll love. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now present President of the Acton Institute, Father Robert Sirico.
Well, well, well. They edited that. You have to go to our Acton YouTube site to see the whole boxing match. I have to confess, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, you know, I like a good argument, and it's a pity you can't go to the United States Senate and get it. It's what public education will get you. Listen, I want to welcome all of our friends, in particular those of you who have been with us for so long a period of time, from the very beginning of the Acton Institute. And I want to acknowledge, he wasn't in the room when Chris was doing the initial acknowledgments, but a friend of mine and a man who I admire greatly, and our own local congressman, almost said senator, Congressman Justin Amash. You're somewhere over in that vicinity. And I have like been adopted by the Lebanese community, and they feed me kibbe and wonderful things. So good to have you with us. I am also thrilled tonight that we have a table from my parish. You know, I'm a priest, a local parish priest at Sacred Heart, and we have a wonderful school there, the Sacred Heart Academy, which is a classical school. 4 years ago, there were 70 students. Now there are 288, and they're wonderful. Could you stand up? You'll see them. You can't see it in this dark, but they're wearing their uniforms. All the kids wear uniforms. Not only do the kids wear uniforms, all the teachers wear uniforms. But why not? Their priest wears a uniform too, so to speak. You know, earlier tonight when you were coming in, and it's, part of the reality of the thing, people coming in, you don't hear, you did not hear Wayburn Dean's rendition of O Freedom. And really, O Freedom speaks not just the words are very simple, but what it is a cry of the human heart that I think in a way sets up and frames what I want to say to you tonight. So if you won't charge us twice, Wayburn, for singing for us tonight, would you just do a chorus or two of O Freedom? Remember, this is the cry of the human heart against slavery. This was the scar at the founding of the United States. This is a scar that some people want to again implement in our society. And this song that was sung by people who were literally enslaved is a battle cry for all of us who will resist anyone who seeks to enslave anyone. And so, Wayburn, let us reverently hear this cry of the human heart again.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, no more weeping. No more weeping over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Gratitude is a powerful and an ameliorative virtue. Think about it. It can heal old wounds. It can weaken temptations. Gratitude can weaken temptations. It gives us an edifying view of a benevolent universe and its creator. And I've often thought how grateful and fortunate that I have been to have walked the face of this earth at the same time as some of the great giants of history. Providence has favored me that I should have met some of them. St. Teresa of Calcutta, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, St. John Paul II, and naturally I count among that number Justice Antonin Scalia. Actually, I came to know the not yet then Father Paul Scalia when he first applied to our Acton Institute seminar in 1992 at the founding of the Acton Institute. Only later did I meet his father. Some years later, when Justice Clarence Thomas, whom Justice Scalia was wont to call Brother Clarence, walked me down the halls of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. I remember him muttering in his breath. He says, "It's like a monastery in here." I said, "It's supposed to be like that, you know." And then he brought me into Justice Scalia's chambers when I first met Antonin Scalia. It was an instant comradeship, as you can imagine, not just because of our mutual Italian heritage or because of our East Coast pedigree. It was rather because we shared a cultural and moral commitment, a view of the rule of law and of society. Now, this is not to say that we agreed on all points of the basis of law. He was, after all, what they call a textualist, and I'm much more of a kind of natural law proponent of the basis of law. But then I thought to myself, who am I to argue with a Supreme Court Justice of the United States? Now, that's what I thought, until one day my secretary came to me and said, "Justice Scalia is on the phone to talk to you." And this really was a follow-up of an exchange of letters, actually faxes that we had exchanged on the topic of capital punishment. Let me just say this about that conversation. The justice was much more robust in his support of capital punishment than the priest was in that conversation. And I just remember him going on very energetically, and I thought, I am really out of my depth. I mean, I can argue, a bit, but this is a Supreme Court justice and an Italian New Jersey guy, not from New York, but from New Jersey. Okay, I can take that. I'm ecumenical. But what was fast becoming an energetic debate, I thought I need to quell. He was indeed a passionate man, and one whose mind and whose commitments remain to me to this day an inspiration. Someone once said of him that his textualism, with regard to the craft of law, didn't prevent him from persistently giving us handsome examples of how jurisprudence of natural law would be done. He did that. And I found myself tempted to despair when I woke up one morning to hear the news reports of his untimely, and I underscore untimely, death. I'm embarrassed to admit my approach toward despair in the presence of his son, Father Scalia, because I can't imagine their own grief at the passing of so great a father and a husband. Since that time, I found myself undergoing a bafflement at this moment in human history, which I need to give voice to because I know it's in the heart of virtually every one of you in this room tonight. I can still recall the palpable sense of hope that I had when I witnessed the Berlin Wall being literally demolished on television right about Christmas in 1989. This is, of course, literally a month before the founding, the legal founding of the Acton Institute. And those were heady days after the collapse of real communism in Central and Eastern Europe. Those were days suffused with optimism and hope. Now, at long last, I thought at that time, the immoral wreck of the collectivist lie has been laid bare for all to see. No more philosophical sophisms could cover up the evil of what it had perpetrated in our world. The anthropological error of socialism was on full display. Yet tonight I fear that we have not learned the lesson that the rule of some over others is not the way forward. That the rule of some over others is the antithesis of progress. Today we're faced with another reality altogether. How in the world could so much of our world have so soon, forgotten the lesson of totalitarianism as we see people being pulled anew into its downward spiral? How can this have happened? And yet that seems to be exactly the case that we're confronted with. There is so very much wrong in our world today. And I'm not just referring to the election here in the United States, so that obviously is a major instance of what plagues us. But at Acton, we've always wanted to go to the root of issues, not just to the surface of issues. I have to tell you that I really lament the fact that almost no one anymore has the ability to engage in a real debate, in a real argument. We have gone, in my own memory, from the days of Firing Line with Bill Buckley to Sean Hannity. What is wrong with our world? Where we no longer listen. Indeed, it seems to me that we no longer have a common grammar with which to really have a conflict with each other. Any first-year debate student knows very quickly that you simply can't have a real debate if you don't have clash. Because the very meaning of the word debate is that you use arguments, you use reason to disagree with ideas. But these days, it's fairly impossible to be able to even hear an argument, if they even express it, above the din of personal attacks and slurs. And to put it honestly, I think, very frankly, the importance of politics, with all due respect to you politicians who are with us tonight, the importance of politics is far, far too inflated in our society. I grant you the instrumental importance of politics, but when politics descends to the level of merely a raw battle over which thug gets to rule our lives, our businesses, our families, and now even our churches until the next election cycle, something has gone seriously askew in our society. If that's what politics means, then we are at a very dangerous point. There's a sobering reflection that I've referenced from time to time over the years that I've been working with the Acton Institute that comes from Friedrich von Hayek. And I think it's worth retrieving for this evening for us to think about. Here's what he said. He said that it may be that the free society, as we have known it, carries within itself the forces of its own destruction. That once freedom has been achieved, it is taken for granted and ceases to be valued. And that the free growth of ideas, which is the essence of what a free society, the essence of a free society will bring about, that if we forget that essence, we're about to see the destruction of the foundations upon which the free society depends. I don't think I'm being overly hyperbolic tonight in observing that this may very be the catastrophe that we are on the verge, the very precipice of seeing, even more so than when Hayek first penned those lines in 1949. So as I see it, the challenge that confronts us is to renew and represent once again what is an appeal to something inherent within each human heart, something we know about ourselves, something we know about our nature, something we know innately. What is that? That the human person precedes the state and has priority over the state. And that the state, as limited as it must be, exists for man and not man for the state. And further, that human beings have are best met at the most local level of their existence, by families, by friends, by neighbors, by churches, by social organizations, and that higher levels of social organization, such as municipalities and cities and states and central government, ought to be the resource of last resort, not the resource of first resort. And further, this means that it takes much more than a political apparatus to raise a child. It takes the most natural thing in the world. It takes a family. And then, that to the extent that the moral institutions are weakened, or to the extent that those moral institutions are weakened by social and legal hostility, political forces will immediately fill that vacuum. And the result will be that there will be a reduction of the very sense of moral obligation, and it will be reduced to a mere observance of legalities or legislation or the observance of certain policies, if you're lucky. That society must not be confused with the government. Because when that happens, you're tempted to think that just because one is opposed to the government doing something is the same as being opposed to it being done at all. Or that if you're skeptical about state education, you're opposed to any education. Or if you're in favor of the separation of church and state, that this automatically means you're in favor of the separation between religion and society. All of this Friedrich Bastiat taught us long ago. To me, these things that I've just said appear to be primordial axioms, virtually self-evident truths, so that to deny them would render any notion of human freedom and concord and civility or liberty null and void. Can you imagine what a moribund culture we would live in should these axioms be rejected? What would it produce? Indeed, I suggest you can see all around you what the dilution and the obfuscation of these principles, these ideas, has indeed produced and is producing. Now let me return for a moment to the notion of despair. And let me be very clear that it is a deadly sin. And given its nature, to abandon all hope, it may be the unpardonable sin, because it disposes itself to reject all hope of redemption. So I reject despair. And I do so not just as a homiletical device for the purpose of this evening's discourse, but as a reasonable response to the crisis that you and I are facing. and a crisis that I am convinced we can overcome. But to overcome the crisis, we must understand its root, and we must understand and plan its cure. In a word, what we have before us is a kind of missionary work ahead of us that will take preparation, commitment, intelligence, a clear vision of the alternative to the ideology of social division, of nativism, of bigotry, and of class warfare. All of us need to learn to look into the eyes of other human beings, regardless of race, regardless of nationality, regardless of the language they speak, or their heritage, or their religion. And we need to see in that human being someone who has been created in the image and the likeness of Almighty God. A being deserving of dignity, a being struggling with difficult issues as all of us struggle with difficult issues, a being that is trying to find his way in this world. Every person on this planet, every person on this planet is deserving of that kind of moral recognition because it is integral to what it means to be a human being. We need to look deeply into the eyes of the other and see a glimpse of that everlasting splendor that C.S. Lewis spoke about. Not a political creation, not an ideological creation, but a real person with a calling and a dignity and a destiny beyond this world. The alternative vision is predicated on a belief. This alternative vision believes firmly in a natural harmony that exists among people and that results from people being able to live lives free of violence and coercion and political manipulation, to truly dialogue with, and yes, even debate one another. We must propose a compelling and winsome case for human rights, for universal dignity, and for the free society. And we must do this with all of the technological skill and strategic prowess at our disposal. We must do it with great philosophical insight and adherence to the truth of who human beings are, with all of the energy that we can conjure. I have to tell you that I believe that it's only now, at this particular moment, and thanks to your partnership, that the Acton Institute has begun to hit its stride. We have been called upon more now at this moment of crisis in our culture, more than we have ever been called upon in our whole history. So this means there's an enormous task ahead of us. This previous quarter of century of our existence has been a lead up to this moment. This is the moment for which we were born. We've already built the networks. We've refined the arguments. We've developed the technology. We've established the base. For a quarter of a century, we have been about the work of cultivating a wide and diverse network of moral leadership internationally. Educators, writers, pastors, ministers, missionaries, priests and nuns, business executives, and homeschooling parents with their multiplying tons of kids. We may just outbirth them because the culture of life replenishes itself while the culture of death immolates itself. My friends, we have been equipping these and many other people, these to influence the influencers with a clear, concise, and consistent message about the interconnection between human freedom and the moral obligation that freedom entails. And true freedom is not the adolescent assertion that one can do what you please, but it is the more adult and mature liberty to do what one ought. We have recruited a veritable army whom we have empowered with a weapon that must ultimately triumph, and it is the truth of the human person, endowed with reason and dignity, who requires liberty to express his or her creativity. A truth that vigorously shuns the jingoistic popularism or the cult of political and personal leadership as much as it does the nanny state. A truth that there is inscribed in each human heart a destiny beyond society, which requires our freedom to work out. What I'm calling for, what I'm involved in, is not a mindless populism or personality cult, much less a nativist and fearful defensiveness about the other. Neither will it be an elitist pragmatism born of a cautious and bureaucratic mentality. It will rather be an authentically liberal idea in the original meaning of that word liberal. Liberalism, which once meant an idea built on the notion that liberty is the political end of man, even if it is not his total end. To be authentically liberal means at least this: we must reject the notion that we can improve human experience on earth if only we have the smartest people with all of the resources at their disposal and massive powers to act as lords of the earth and of our lives. We must reject that. No. This way, we have seen historically, has produced disasters, small and large. Instead, we need to learn to appreciate the delicate elegance of voluntary human association, the gradual unfolding of civilization as it emerges through human choice and forms of sustainable institutions. Institutions that are humane, that are productive, that are virtuous, and that affirm life. To be sure, this liberal idea will not create a perfect world, nor should we think that that's our aspiration, to create a perfect world. Heaven is, after all, outside man's reach, or else what's a heaven for? The poet said. What we need is a terrain of peace and freedom that will allow the gradual emergence of an ever-improving world and an ever-improving human community that lives in this world. This, I suggest to you, is the most realistic thing we can expect this side of heaven, and that ain't bad. If we can achieve this, this will consume the rest of our lives until we pass this task on to our descendants. What we need desperately today, my friends, more than ever before, is to turn away from the partisanship with which we find ourselves inundated, which ultimately only seeks to divide up the spoils. What we need is to recognize that what ails society today will not be cured by a fixation on the politics of left or right. The antidote for the metastasis that is wreaking havoc on our body politic is a new vision, a vision based on an ancient insight that sees and reveres the human person in all his fullness, a vision that lifts our eyes above the ad hominem attacks and the corruption of both government and business. If we need politics at all, then what we need is a politics that extends from the highest callings of an ethical life, from the moral imperatives of human dignity, and from the practicalities of human experience and personal knowledge. I suggest to you that this and only this will make possible peace and cooperation across national and racial divides and result in prosperity and the well-being of people. The one point that is so manifestly evident to me is that the dogmatic ideologies of right and left only get in the way of finding this way forward. We have no models to impose upon the world. We have only a hope for human experience to be authentic, to be free, to be moral, and to be conducive to a flourishing and good life. What Hayek called for in his day was an appeal to the imagination so that the building of a free society might once more be an intellectual, and I would add a moral adventure, a deed of courage. What the Acton Institute has done for the last 26 years, from our very beginning, what we intend to continue to do at least as long as I'm the captain of this ship, is to identify and cultivate a generation of highly equipped, morally sound, and intellectually vigorous leaders who are willing to work for an ideal, however small may be the prospects of its early realization, but to work for that ideal rigorously and consistently and indefatigably. These are people who will be and who are willing to stick to principles and to fight for the full realization of these ideals, however remote. So I suggest tonight that what we do is push through the fog of politics that surrounds us and instead move forward with courage, move forward with intelligence, move forward with hope, and with a sincere desire to do the good, with a confidence that humanity can indeed right itself and get back on the path toward building the good society, not just here in the United States, but throughout the world. In conclusion, let us keep in mind Alexis de Tocqueville's exhortation that for society to escape so great a destruction, the moral tie must be strengthened as the political tie is relaxed. This, my friends, is certainly within our control. Let us pledge ourselves tonight to strengthen those ties now and throughout our lives. Thank you very much.